You make thousands of decisions every day. What to eat, what to buy, who to trust. But most of those choices aren't really yours. Your brain runs on hidden shortcuts, traps that trick you without you ever noticing. In this video, we'll uncover 18 of those mental traps. And the scary part? They don't just make you wrong. They make you confidently wrong. Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow exposes these traps and shows how to fight back before they ruin your decisions. And if you want quick access to all 18 traps, grab the blueprint in the description. Now, let's dive in. Part 1. The two voices in your head. Peanut butter, and you don't have to think. The answer pops up instantly. That's the first voice in your head. System 1. The quick thinker. Automatic, effortless, emotional, and incredibly fast. It runs on patterns and stories. If a story feels smooth, it feels true. It recognizes a face, finishes phrases, and hits the brakes before you even think. That's why you instantly say jelly. It's the brain's default mode. Fast, but not always reliable. And that makes you easy to manipulate, easy to fool. Then there's the second voice. System 2, the slow thinker. This one, on the other hand, doesn't run automatically. You have to switch it on. It's logical, deliberate, and effortful. It solves math, plans ahead, weighs pros and cons, and checks for mistakes. It's reliable but costly, because your attention is a limited resource. That's why System 2 gets overloaded so easily. Then, when you're tired or distracted, it checks out, and your brain falls back to System 1, which runs on shortcuts to keep up with the daily overload. The two systems work together, but not equally. System 1 jumps to conclusions. System 2 is supposed to be the inner skeptic, but too often it stays quiet. That's why you fall for biases like stereotypes and stories that feel right even when they're wrong. Kahneman calls this the law of least effort. Your brain always takes the easy path. Most of the time that's fine, but when money, health, or reputation are on the line, mental traps get dangerous. And in today's world, ads and social media make it even worse. Smooth visuals, familiar music, confident voices, all designed to hijack System 1 and leave you vulnerable to bad decisions. Part 2. Your life trapped by System 1. Chapter 1. Money and choices. The first number controls you. Can you imagine a random spin of a wheel changing your judgment? Yes, it can. In one experiment, people spun a wheel set to stop at either 10 or 65. Then they were asked, what percentage of African countries are in the United Nations? Those who saw 10 guessed around 25. Those who saw 65 guessed about 45. Same question, a meaningless number, but the anchor pulled their minds. The real answer? About 45% at the time. So one group got close, only because the anchor dragged them there, not because they knew. That's why a $200 pair of pants suddenly feels cheap at $99. Or why a recruiter saying 40,000 makes 60,000 feel greedy. This is the anchoring effect. The first number frames everything after it, because System 1 grabs the anchor. And experience doesn't save you. Even judges, even experts fall for it. So how do you fight it? First, call it out. Say to yourself, that's an anchor. Second, flip it. Imagine the number way lower or higher. And third, set the anchor yourself whenever you can. In negotiation, the first number isn't just talk. It sets power. But numbers alone aren't the only trap. Sometimes the way they're wrapped in words is enough to flip your decision. How a single word changes your choice. Imagine an investment framed as a 95% chance of profit. Now flip it. A 5% chance of loss. The math doesn't change, but our emotions do. That's the framing effect. The way a choice is presented changes the decision, even when the facts are identical. And it doesn't stop at money. Kahneman and Tversky tested this with doctors facing a hypothetical epidemic expected to kill 600 people. They had to choose how to treat them. One program was described in terms of lives saved, the other in terms of deaths. The outcomes were identical, but doctors consistently chose survival. You can see it in food labels. A yogurt marked 90% fat-free outsells the same one labeled 10% fat. Same product, same nutrition, but one feels healthy, the other feels bad for you. You also see it in public policy. Kahneman showed this with organ donation policies in Europe. In Germany, where people had to opt in to be organ donors, only about 12% signed up. But in neighboring Austria, with an opt-out system, the rate shot up to 99%. Same culture, same values, just a different frame. A single checkbox changed the entire outcome. So how do you protect yourself? Flip the frame. If you see survival, ask about mortality. If you see profit, ask about loss. When both versions are on the table, System 2 finally has a chance to step in. But when those numbers reflect your money, the way they're framed as gain or loss decides which choice you make. Why losses hit harder than gains? Picture yourself at a casino table. The dealer slides 2 cards in front of you. Option A. Flip the card and you've got a 50% chance to win $1,000. Option B. Walk away right now with a guaranteed $500 in your hand. Most people take the sure $500. But now the dealer smiles and flips the script. Option A. A 50% chance to lose $1,000. Option B. A guaranteed loss of $500. Suddenly, most people start gambling. The math is the same, but our psychology isn't. This is prospect theory, the idea that won Kahneman the Nobel Prize. It revealed 3 rules of risky choice. First, we judge outcomes by reference points, not absolute terms. Where you are now or think you should be defines how it feels. If you have $5,000 today, it feels awful if you had $10,000 yesterday. But amazing if you only had $1,000 yesterday. Subjective experience speaks louder than objective numbers. Second, as gains or losses grow, each extra unit has diminishing sensitivity. The first $100 matters more when you only have $200 than when you have $1,000. Each extra unit feels weaker than the last. Third, loss aversion. Losses hurt about twice as much as gains of the same size feel good. That's why investors cling to losing stocks, hoping they'll recover. It's why negotiations get stuck. Every concession feels like a painful loss, while the same concessions barely register as gains for you. It's why reforms fail. People fight harder to avoid losing a benefit than others fight to gain a new one. On average, people won't risk losing $100 unless they could win at least $150, sometimes even $250. In other words, the possible gain has to be 1.5 to 2.5 times bigger than the loss. That's how much heavier losses weigh on our minds. The lesson is simple. Losses and bad events grab our attention, shape our judgments, and block cooperation more than equivalent gains ever could. So here's the trick: awareness. Name the bias when you feel it. Ask, if this were a gain instead of a loss, would I react the same way? Reframe decisions in terms of long-term outcomes, not immediate pain. Losing hurts more than winning feels good. Maybe that's why what we own always feels more valuable than what we don't. Why you overprice what's yours? Imagine you're given a simple coffee mug, nothing special, just a mug. The very next day, someone offers to buy it from you. How much would you ask? This was a real experiment. Half the students in a class were randomly given mugs. The other half weren't. Then they started trading. The buyers were willing to pay about $3 for a mug, but the sellers, who had only owned it for a few minutes, wanted at least $6 to give it up. Same mugs, same market, but ownership alone doubled the price. This is the endowment effect, the tendency to value what we own more than what we don't. Loss aversion explains why. As seen earlier, giving something up feels like a loss, and losses hurt about twice as much as gains feel good. So once we own something even briefly, losing it feels worse than acquiring it ever felt good. That's why homeowners overprice their own house, because selling feels like a loss. Fans refuse to sell game tickets, even when offered a fortune, and employees resist losing small benefits, even when offered bigger new ones. All irrational and all explained by the endowment effect. Still, there are exceptions. The effect is strongest for things we use and enjoy, like mugs, tickets, or houses. It's weaker for things we see as purely for trade, like money or stocks. Also, people used to frequent transactions feel it less, but most of us feel it strongly. So yes, we hate giving up what we own, and that's exactly why we keep sinking time and money into bad decisions, just to avoid feeling that loss. Why you stick with bad decisions? Imagine you bought a $100 ticket to see your favorite team. You've been waiting for weeks, planning the day, maybe even bragging to friends. But when game day comes, there's a blizzard. The roads are icy, the seats will be freezing. Do you still go? Most people force themselves to go if they paid. But if the ticket was free, they'd stay home. That's the sunk cost fallacy, letting past expenses control future choices. The money's already gone, but we let it trap us. Think of managers who keep pouring money into failing projects just to justify what they've already spent, or even forcing yourself to finish a bad meal just because you paid for it. We hate admitting losses, so we keep digging deeper. Loss aversion explains it. Canceling a project feels like locking in a loss, so we avoid it, even when it's rational. Psychologists call this narrow framing, looking at each decision in isolation instead of seeing the bigger picture. And when we decide case by case, loss aversion pushes us into mistakes. Kahneman's solution is broad framing. Zoom out, look at decisions as part of a bigger pattern, and set rules in advance. He calls these risk policies, broad rules that apply across situations instead of deciding in the heat of the moment. Take investing. If you evaluate every swing, you'll panic sell. But if your rule is invest for the long term, one bad month won't shake you. Policies protect you from reliving the same fear over and over. They turn emotional traps into consistent strategy. Chapter 2. People and Perception. The fast stories that trick your brain. In 1978, researchers ran an experiment where participants were told a stranger was either extroverted or introverted. Then they had to interview them. Those who thought the person was extroverted asked questions like, "What do you do to liven up a party?" Those who thought they were introverted asked, "What makes it hard for you to meet new people?" By the end, the interviewers had convinced themselves their label was true. That's confirmation bias. It starts with a belief, yours or someone else's, and you search for evidence that fits while ignoring what doesn't. Close to it is the halo effect. It doesn't start with a belief. It starts with one strong impression, and that single positive or negative trait fills in the blanks for everything else. In one experiment, participants were shown photos of strangers and asked to rate their traits. Attractive women, for example, were consistently rated as more intelligent, more capable, and even kinder, just because they were attractive. That's the halo effect in action. And Kahneman explains both confirmation bias and halo with a bigger principle he calls, "What you see is all there is." System 1 takes the few facts in front of you, builds a complete story, and makes you feel sure of yourself, even when most of the evidence is missing. And from that flaw, other traps emerge. Overconfidence. We trust stories built on thin evidence simply because they're coherent. Base rate neglect. In experiments, people read a description of a quiet, bookish student and judged him more likely to be a librarian than a farmer, even though farmers outnumber librarians by 20 to 1. It shows that we ignore statistics in favor of stereotypes. Substitution. When a question is too hard, System 1 quietly replaces it with an easier one. Ask, "Is this company financially solid?" And your brain may answer, "Do I like the CEO's face?" Or ask, "How happy am I with my life overall?" And you may answer, "How happy am I right now?" That's substitution, and it's why the weather, your mood, or even what happened an hour ago can distort how you judge your entire life. Sometimes jumping to conclusions works fine. In familiar situations with low stakes, fast answers save time. But when the problem is new or the stakes are high, like hiring, voting, or investing, those shortcuts backfire. That's when you need to slow down. So how do you defend yourself? Make judgments independent. Write down your view before a meeting, so one loud voice won't steer you. Flip the question. If you ask, "Is Sam unfriendly?" Also ask, "What are 3 friendly moments?" Make the search fair. Consider the opposite. List one fact that supports your view, then one that contradicts it. If you can't find both, you're probably telling yourself a story. But System 1 doesn't just invent stories in the moment. Its most dangerous move is rewriting your past. Why the past always feels obvious, but isn't. Think back to the 2008 financial crisis. Once it happened, every headline claimed it was inevitable. Greedy banks, risky products, blind regulators. The story felt obvious, but only after the fact. Kahneman calls this the illusion of understanding, the sense that history was predictable once we know how it ended. He borrows Nassim Taleb's phrase narrative fallacy to explain why. We reshape messy, unpredictable events into neat stories. They feel logical, but they exaggerate skill and ignore luck. Hindsight bias makes this even worse. It makes it personal. Once we know the outcome, we don't just say it was obvious. We rewrite our own memory and tell ourselves, I knew it all along. Kahneman showed this during Nixon's historic 1972 trip to China and the Soviet Union. Before the trip, people were asked to give odds on different outcomes. Would Nixon meet Mao? Would treaties be signed? Would relations improve? After the trip, when the outcomes were known, the same people remembered their original predictions as being much closer to reality than they actually were. Knowing the outcome reshaped their memory of the past. It can also lead to outcome bias, judging decisions by their results instead of how reasonable they were at the time. Think of an entrepreneur. If their gamble pays off, they're bold and visionary. If it fails, they're suddenly reckless. The risk was identical, only luck changed the story. So, how do you defend yourself? First, stay humble. Remember that luck and randomness play a much bigger role than the stories suggest. Second, judge decisions by the quality of the process, not the outcome. A smart decision that fails is still smart if it was based on good reasons. And third, fight hindsight by writing down your predictions before events happen. That way you see how uncertain the future really is, and avoid the trap of thinking you knew it all along. Chapter 3. Fear and risk in the news. What comes to mind feels true. Think about the last time you saw a plane crash on the news. For days afterward, flying felt dangerous, even though the odds never changed. But the event was fresh in memory, so your brain made it feel more likely. That's the availability heuristic. System 1 runs this trap automatically. In one study, people asked to list a few times they used their bike believed they used it often. But those asked to list many examples believed they used it less, because recalling so many felt harder. That's why events that come to mind easily feel common, while those harder to recall feel rare. It's not the content of memory that matters. It's the ease of recall. That's why repetition is such a powerful tool, or a dangerous weapon, aimed at our brain. Indeed, even false statements start to feel true once repeated, simply because they become easier to process. Familiarity breeds belief. That's why slogans, headlines, and sound bites stick. Repetition makes them feel true. It's why people think crime is rising if the news shows violent cases, even when crime rates are falling, and why rare risks like shark attacks or terrorism feel bigger than they are, while common risks like heart disease barely make the news. This bias is powerful because it shapes what we fear, what we vote for, and how we spend money. So, to defend yourself, pause and ask, am I judging from facts or from vivid examples? Check the data when you can, because memory is a bad statistician. But repetition doesn't just make things feel true in your own mind. When a vivid story spreads across headlines and social media, fear multiplies, and that's when belief turns into panic. How fear goes viral. Picture the news cycle. A small story breaks. It's repeated across headlines, debated on talk shows, and shared endlessly on social media. Within days, it feels like a national crisis, even if the actual risk is tiny. This goes beyond memory. Here, emotion takes over. When we ask, how risky is this? Our brain often substitutes, how do I feel about it? And while fear makes risks feel bigger, calm makes them shrink. So when the story is repeated everywhere, fear cascades into crisis. That's the availability cascade, a chain reaction where repetition fuels urgency and fear spreads far beyond the evidence. That's why rare but vivid events dominate headlines. Plane crashes, shark attacks, terrorism. They're statistically tiny, but the images are unforgettable, so we overestimate their chance in our lives. Meanwhile, common killers like car accidents or heart disease barely make the news. So people underestimate their risk, buy lottery tickets, overweighting a rare win, and skip insurance for disasters that are actually more likely. Kahneman showed that the way probabilities are framed changes how we feel about them. Saying 1 in 1,000 feels scarier than 0.1% because it makes you picture a single victim. The rare event sticks in your mind. But when nothing draws attention to a rare risk, we go blind to it. If a flood hasn't hit in 50 years, homeowners act like it never will. If the stock market is calm for months, investors forget crashes are possible. In short, rare events distort judgment in both directions. We overweight them when they're vivid and emotional, and we ignore them when they're invisible. So how do you defend yourself? When you feel emotional about a risk, pause. Ask, am I judging by feelings or by facts? Compare numbers, not just stories. How many people are actually affected? Notice when a topic is everywhere. Repetition doesn't mean importance. It may just mean visibility. And when a rare risk feels impossible, remind yourself, low probability isn't zero probability. Rare still means real. So repetition can turn a small risk into a crisis. And the reason is simple. Your brain is wired for survival. Why bad news hits you harder than good. Imagine you're in a quiet lab wearing a strange cap covered in electrodes. You've signed up for a psychology experiment and your job seems simple. Words flash on a screen and you just have to look at them. Peace. Love. Your brain stays calm. Then comes murder. Instantly, your brainwaves spike. Next, vomit. Another surge, faster and stronger than before. This time, it isn't about how easily something comes to mind or how often it's repeated. It's about weight. Negative words trigger stronger brain responses than positive ones. And the wild part? It happens even when you're told to ignore the meaning or when the words are flashed so quickly you can barely read them. That's the negativity bias, our tendency to pay more attention to bad events than good ones. Evolution wired us this way. A reward could make your day. A threat could end your life. So evolution set the scale toward fear. That's why the brain treats bad news as more urgent than good news. You see it everywhere. In negotiations, the concessions I give you feel like painful losses, while the same concessions barely register as gains for you. That imbalance makes deals hard to reach. In politics, reforms often get stuck because people resist giving up small benefits, even if the overall change would be positive. Even fairness is tied to this bias. People judge an outcome as unfair if it feels like a loss, even when the long-term benefits are larger. Losses simply weigh heavier than gains. Chapter 4. Planning Your Future. The Optimism Trap. Optimists change the world. They start businesses, launch projects, and take the risks that move society forward. But optimism is also a trap. Psychologists once asked college students how long it would take to finish their senior thesis. On average, students guessed 34 days. Then researchers asked, okay, if everything goes wrong, delays, distractions, setbacks, how long then? They said 49 days. But in reality, the average completion time was 55 days. Even when people imagine worst-case scenarios, they're still too optimistic. Kahneman calls this the optimism bias, our tendency to see the bright side and underestimate how much luck and risk shape outcomes. The most common form is the planning fallacy. We build timelines and budgets based on best-case scenarios, not realistic ones. You see it everywhere. Startup founders believe they'll be the next unicorn, but most companies fail within a few years. Even writers misjudge how long a book will take, forgetting thousands of abandoned drafts. Managers promise projects in 6 months that consistently drag on for 12. Kahneman calls optimism the engine of capitalism, because while we celebrate the winners everywhere, countless losers stay hidden. That's the survivorship bias, and it amplifies our illusion of control, strengthening the belief that effort alone guarantees success. And sure, optimism drives innovation, but effort isn't enough. Success also depends on timing, luck, and risks you can't control. And when optimism blinds us to that, it fuels bubbles, bankruptcies, and broken dreams. People bet everything on rosy forecasts, ignoring the dangers that could sink them. So how do you keep the benefits of optimism without being blinded by it? Kahneman points to a tool from psychologist Gary Klein, the pre-mortem. Before committing to a plan, tell your team, imagine it's 1 year from now. We went ahead with this plan, and it failed completely. Write down the story of what went wrong. Everyone lists possible failure points. Suddenly, hidden risks surface, and the plan gets stronger. Optimism survives, but it's balanced with realism. Chapter 5. Patterns and Luck. Why you keep seeing patterns that don't exist. Imagine flipping a coin 10 times. It lands heads, heads, heads. 7 out of 10. It feels like the coin is broken, biased somehow. But it isn't. The sample is just too small. Now flip it 1,000 times and the results settle closer to 50-50. Big samples smooth out the swing from small ones. That's the law of large numbers at work. But our brains fall for the opposite, the law of small numbers. We believe tiny samples tell the whole truth because the brain hates randomness. You see it everywhere. A movie studio scores 3 hits in a row, and suddenly the new CEO has the magic touch. Or online, a laptop gets 2 bad reviews, and suddenly everyone thinks it's junk, even if thousands of buyers are satisfied. In reality, the sample is too small to mean anything. Small samples are the ones most likely to produce extreme, misleading results. Kahneman showed this in a hospital study. People were asked, which hospital is more likely to record a day where 60% of newborns are boys, a small hospital or a large one? Most said both are equally likely. But the truth is, smaller hospitals see extreme results far more often. The law of small numbers makes us blind to this. This bias feeds the gambler's fallacy. 3 losses in a row, and we think a win is due. 3 wins in a row, and we think the streak will continue. Both are stories built on noise. So, how do you defend yourself? Always ask, how big is the sample? Remember that small samples exaggerate extremes. When results look too perfect, ask yourself, is this a real pattern or just random chance? And when small samples don't fool us, resemblance does. System 1 trades statistics for stereotypes, and the image beats numbers. When stereotypes beat statistics. Imagine you're on the subway in New York. You spot someone reading the New York Times. Which is more likely, he has a PhD or he never finished college? Your gut probably leans PhD. It feels like that matches the stereotype of a Times reader. But statistically, you'd be safer betting on no degree. There are far more non-graduates riding the subway. This is the representativeness heuristic. Instead of thinking in probabilities, System 1 judges by resemblance. We focus on the match between traits and stereotypes, while ignoring the base rate, the actual odds in the real world. Kahneman illustrated this with Tom W., a fictional student described as shy, analytical, and detail-oriented. When asked to guess his field, most people picked computer science. It felt like the perfect fit. But statistically, far more students study social sciences. The base rate was ignored. System 1 chose the story over the numbers. This leads to 2 traps. First, overpredicting rare events. A startup founder who fits the genius stereotype gets praised as the next Steve Jobs, even though most startups fail. Second, trusting weak evidence. A single detail that feels representative can outweigh stronger, more relevant facts. You see it in courtrooms, where jurors often believe a witness who looks honest even when the evidence says otherwise. When coherence clashes with probability, System 1 always prefers the story. The only defense is to slow down and ask 2 questions. What's the base rate? How common is this outcome in general? And how strong is the evidence beyond the stereotype? If the answer feels too neat, you're probably mistaking resemblance for reality. And if a single stereotype can fool you, add more details and the trap gets even deeper. The story feels richer, but the odds only get worse. Why details trick you? Meet Linda. She's 31, bright, outspoken, and deeply concerned with social justice. She studied philosophy in college. Now, which is more likely? Linda is a bank teller. Linda is a bank teller and active in the feminist movement. If you're like most people, you picked option 2. It feels right, but logically, it's impossible. She can't be more likely to be both than to be one. A single category is always more probable than a narrower combined one. This error is called the conjunction fallacy. Here's why it happens. System 1 loves coherent stories. Bank teller and feminist matches Linda's description better than bank teller alone. The story feels smooth, so it feels true. But probability doesn't care about stories. Every added detail lowers the odds, never raises them. Kahneman and Tversky presented the Linda experiment to thousands of participants, from undergrads to people with doctorates in statistics. Again and again, the majority chose the more detailed option. Even experts who knew the math got it wrong, even when reminded of probability rules. That's how powerful the bias is. Coherence beats logic. Plausibility beats probability. And this mistake isn't limited to psychology experiments. Investors fall for forecasts packed with specifics. When the market will peak, which sector will rise, which company will win. The story feels precise, but every extra detail only lowers the odds. The danger is obvious. This fallacy makes us trust confident predictions, even when they're stacked with assumptions. Before the 2008 financial crisis, analysts sold confident, detailed scenarios. Housing prices will keep rising for the next 5 years, mortgage-backed securities are safe, and the banking system is solid. The story felt right, so investors believed it. But the more details stacked up, the less likely the story was true. So how do you defend yourself? Cut scenarios back to their simplest version. Compare base probabilities, because every extra detail lowers the odds, no matter how smooth the story feels. If extra details can trick us into false stories, extreme results do the same. We turn random highs and lows into causes, when most of the time, it's just luck evening out. Why extreme highs and lows always come down to average. Kahneman recalled a moment from his time in the Air Force. An instructor told him, "Whenever I praise a cadet for a good flight, he performs worse the next time. But when I scold a cadet for a bad flight, he usually performs better on the next one." To him, that proved criticism worked better than praise. But he was wrong. When performance is unusually bad, it usually includes a dose of bad luck. As luck evens out, results drifts back toward average. The real reason was regression to the mean. The officer thought his yelling caused the improvement, but the bias is mistaking this swing in performance for cause and effect. This plays out everywhere. A student nails an exam, then scores closer to average next time, or a new trader wins big, then looks less magical later. Kahneman puts it simply. Every success is a mix of talent and luck. And when you see great success, it usually means a little more talent, but a lot more luck. The mistake is thinking our praise or punishment caused the swing, when in reality numbers just fluctuate and extremes don't last. So how do you avoid this trap? Expect averages. Don't overreact to one extreme result. Don't confuse regression with your influence, and reward effort and consistency, not lucky results. Chapter 6. Attention and Self-Control. When your willpower runs out. In one experiment, people sat in a room with two bowls, one filled with warm, fresh cookies, the other with plain radishes. Some participants were told they could eat the cookies. Others were forced to resist and only eat the radishes. Afterward, everyone was given a tricky puzzle. The cookie eaters worked at it for an average of 19 minutes. The radish eaters gave up after just 8. Simply resisting temptation drained their willpower and cut their persistence. That's because System 2 doesn't just solve problems. It also keeps your impulses in check, which means self-control and heavy thinking run on the same fuel. That's why after a long day of decisions, a sleepless night, or a few drinks, you grab fast food, spend impulsively, or write a quick, careless email. System 2 is drained, so System 1 takes the wheel. Kahneman calls this ego depletion. When your brain is busy or tired, judgment weakens and impulsivity rises. And it makes you vulnerable to bad choices, risky behaviors, and impulsive promises, because they all sneak in when self-control is low. So how do you defend yourself? Save big decisions for when you're calm, rested, and clear-headed. If you're drained, delay or shrink the choice to something smaller. And when System 2 is drained, you don't just lose willpower. You also start trusting whatever feels smooth, even when it's false. What's simple feels true, but misleads you. Let's say you're scrolling online and see two ads. One has clean design, simple words, and a catchy slogan. The other is clunky, crowded, and hard to read. Which one feels more trustworthy? Chances are you'll trust the smooth one, even if the content is nonsense. Psychologists call this cognitive ease. The easier something is to process, the truer it feels. That's why clear fonts, strong contrast, and simple words feel more trustworthy. Ease creates comfort, and System 1 mistakes that comfort for truth. On the flip side, when you encounter cognitive strain, hard-to-read fonts, clunky words, unfamiliar phrasing, System 2 wakes up. You slow down, check more carefully, and become more skeptical. This is why repetition works. Hear something often enough and it feels familiar, and familiarity feels true. It's also why form beats content. A clean design or pronounceable name inspires trust, even when the substance is weak. In the stock market, companies with simple, pronounceable names outperformed those with complex ones, simply because investors felt more comfortable with them. Mood matters too. In a good mood, you rely more on System 1. You're more intuitive and creative, but also more gullible, more prone to logical errors. In a bad mood, you slow down, grow suspicious, and System 2 takes charge. So how do you defend yourself? Watch out for fluency. If something feels true just because it's familiar or easy to process, pause. Ask, am I trusting the content or just the packaging? Smooth doesn't always mean true, and if smooth words can trick you, hidden cues go even deeper. They don't just shape what feels true. They quietly guide what you think and do. How hidden cues secretly control your thoughts. Let's play a quick game. Think of food for a moment. Now look at this word. Chances are you thought soup. That's normal. But if I'd shown you cleaning products instead, you probably would have said soap. Same letters, different associations. That's priming in action. Priming happens because your mind runs on what Kahneman calls the associative machine. Think of it as a mental web. Every thought links to others. Touch one strand, and related ideas ripple across the net. That's why a single cue, a word, an image, even a smell, can shape what you notice, how you feel, and what you do. You see it everywhere. Pictures of money prime people to act more independently. Holding something warm makes you judge strangers as friendlier. Luxury ads prime status goals, making ordinary products feel cheap. A news feed full of outrage primes you to see threats everywhere. Even smiling or holding a pen between your teeth to force a smile makes jokes seem funnier. And priming also shapes what feels normal. Everyday expectations come from this web. But when something breaks the pattern, System 1 reacts instantly. It's the alarm that spots surprise before you even think. Imagine hearing a man say, "I just gave birth yesterday." The surprise hits first. Then, if the situation matters, System 2 steps in to explain and analyze. So how do you defend yourself? Pay attention to context. If you notice a sudden shift in your mood or judgment, ask what might have primed you. Be especially wary of repetition, slogans, and visuals designed to change your feelings. Awareness is your only defense. Slow down and check. Is this really my thought, or just a planted cue?